Well, British Prime Minister Theresa May has responded by saying that Britain must be tougher in stamping out Islamist extremism, saying the country has been too tolerant of expressions of extremism. She also proposed regulating internet and social media platforms.
We cannot allow this ideology the safe space it needs to breed. Yet that is precisely what the internet and the big companies that provide internet-based services provide. We need to work with allied democratic governments to reach international agreements that regulate cyberspace to prevent the spread of extremist and terrorism planning. And we need to do everything we can at home to reduce the risks of extremism online.
May resumed campaigning for Thursday's general election after pausing briefly after the attack. Some have questioned her plans to combat terrorism and boost security. The opposition party has criticised her for cutting police funding while she was Home Secretary. Now, for more on cutting terrorism's ties with the internet, I'm joined by Fraser Rahim. He's the Executive Director for North America for the counter-terrorism organisation Quilliam. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Now, Mohammed, we heard Prime Minister Theresa May call for closer regulation of the internet following this attack in London. What specifically can the government do?
You know, the government can work closely with social media companies right here in the United States, where the majority of these social media firms are based. There are great proactive measures that are taking place that are great examples between cooperation between government and private sector. So there are good practices that are taking place in the U.S. that the U.K. can certainly borrow from as well.
And speaking of social media, she did call out big companies that provide internet-based services. But what responsibility could and should they have when it comes to countering terrorism?
Well, you know, the companies themselves have to certainly police themselves. It's not an easy task. I mean, there are measures that they are constantly trying to adjust. You've probably heard about the attacks with Facebook Live, where individuals who have been caught online with murders or murderers attacks that have been taking place. So if we can find ways to make sure that a terrorist attack doesn't take place live, then that's certainly part of some good practices we can learn from.
And touching on that, what are some of the ways that some of these terror groups really are utilizing the internet and social media?
Well, what they do is they borrow from past events. I mean, Al-Qaeda itself has been adaptive. It learns from its past mistakes. They are able to bring slick videos. If you look at the grainy footage of the past, ISIS is now Apple, if you will, and Al-Qaeda would be seen as BlackBerry. So they're very much adapting toward this new generation. They are able to appeal to millennials who are certainly attracted to the new shiny object as well.
So then what's being done to really incentivize more companies to be more proactive about some of the content that they're seeing that's really helping recruit people online?
I think, quite frankly, events like what we're seeing in London. I mean, terrorist attacks, unfortunately, also put pressure externally, making the private companies do more. I mean, unfortunately, these events aren't going to go away. It's not when, it's not if, it's when another attack will take place. So private companies are seeing the responsibility, and I think we're only going to see an increased collaboration between government and private sector.
Now, as you mentioned, there is this idea of security measures really trying to play catch-up, and we have a lot of these extreme organizations that have a lot of tentacles in the internet. How are they keeping pace? Can the government ever really get out ahead of some of these websites?
It's not an easy task. As a former counterterrorism analyst myself, I can say that the challenge and the struggle, it's an iterative process. It's one in which it's a give and take. It's one in which you're constantly experimenting and trying to figure out what will work. Do you give a little bit more? Do you give a bit less? So I think what it is learning from what works perhaps in one location to see if this can be good practices in other locations throughout the world. This is a global epidemic that we all are challenged with, and one in which we're going to be dealing with for at least the near and short term as well.
And we're seeing a lot of governments trying a lot of different initiatives trying to really get out ahead of this. What are some examples of governments who are perhaps at the forefront of this?
I mean, quite frankly, I think the U.S. is certainly doing some efforts. I mean, we have prevention efforts that we are trying to work directly with communities. Quilliam itself, we work directly with communities. We work with young kids who have been radicalized. And so there's some good examples in the U.S. Some other European countries are dealing with it as it relates to individuals who are returning from Syria. So the responsibility is one in which we can all share good practices, as I've mentioned before, and find ways in which we can solve this very difficult puzzle, if you will.
Now, you have this issue of security, and then on the other hand, you have this issue of protecting people's privacy, and that it also includes companies trying to protect their clients' privacy. We saw that in the San Bernardino shootings. How do you strike that balance?
It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. I think that we've been seeing in the popular era this globalization, and so what happens globally will have to have a local effect, even at the state, national, and local level as well. And so what I argue to say is that the global community, the international community, can't just put out a memorandum, they can't just put out policies, but they have to find real-world solutions that will work with private companies and also the local individuals who will actually deal with this as well.
And what do you see as the biggest challenge in really hindering some of this success, of getting everyone on the same page about how they implement these strategies?
You know, quite frankly, you know, some of the laws, for example, in the UK, the legal measures, the infrastructure to deal with this certainly could be ramped up quite a bit. I mean, I think that, quite frankly, we will see the elections taking place on Thursday dictating whether you're on the conservative side or if you're on more liberal side, to decide that someone will have to take a tougher stance. I think the UK government, the UK population will cast their vote on Thursday to determine the outcome for this.
No doubt this will weigh heavily on their minds. Thank you so much, Mohammed Fraser Rahim, Quilliam's Executive Director